Money, it feels so ordinary today, doesn't it? Paper bills, shiny coins, digital numbers on a screen. We swipe, we tap, we spend, and most of the time we never stop to think about it. But throughout human history, the idea of money has been far from ordinary. In fact, the story of money is one of the strangest, wildest, and most creative journeys our species has ever taken. Because for thousands of years, people didn't use coins, didn't use paper, and definitely didn't use credit cards. They used whatever they could find, objects that, by today's standards, seem absolutely bizarre. And the strangest part, these things actually worked. They kept societies running, they built kingdoms, and they even started wars. Let us dive into some of the most unbelievable examples of what humans once considered valuable enough to call money. Imagine you're standing on a tropical island in the Pacific Ocean centuries ago. The people of Yap, a small island in Micronesia, used a kind of currency that is still legendary. Giant stone discs called rai stones. These massive carved stones could weigh thousands of pounds. Some were so large that they couldn't be moved at all. So how could they be used as money? Simple, the community remembered who owned which stone. If a family bought land or livestock, the ownership of a rai stone would transfer, but the stone itself might never move an inch. One of the funniest things is that sometimes these stones sank while being transported across the ocean, yet they still counted as valid money. Everyone agreed that the stone was lying on the seabed, but ownership was what mattered. Imagine paying for your house with a giant boulder sitting miles away underwater. That was real money on Yap. But stones weren't the only unusual currency. Let's jump to Africa, where salt was once so valuable that it became a form of money. Salt wasn't just seasoning back then, it was life itself. In hot climates, salt preserved food, kept people from dying of dehydration, and could be traded across deserts where nothing else had much value. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin word sal, meaning salt, because Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it. Think about that for a moment. An empire so powerful it conquered half the known world, and its mighty armies marched because of blocks of salt. Today we casually sprinkle it on our fries without a second thought. But in ancient times it could buy livestock, slaves, even entire cities. To run out of salt was like running out of cash in your bank account today. Now picture yourself in the cold, frozen north among the Vikings. These fierce warriors and traders didn't just rely on coins. At times they used dried codfish as currency. Yes, fish, the seas around Scandinavia were full of them, and cod was so essential to their diet that it became a kind of standard exchange. Dried properly, cod lasted for months, which made it perfect for trading. Imagine paying your taxes in fish, or buying a weapon with stacks of cod. Smelly, yes. Practical, surprisingly, yes. When you live in a world where survival depends on resources, sometimes the most basic food becomes more valuable than gold. And speaking of food, cacao beans in the Aztec Empire were considered true money. Long before chocolate bars filled supermarket shelves, cacao was seen as a sacred gift from the gods. The beans were small, portable, and hard to counterfeit, ideal for trade. An Aztec market might list the price of a rabbit as 10 cacao beans, or the cost of a slave as several hundred. Strangely, some people were tempted to counterfeit this currency by hollowing out beans and filling them with dirt. But the Aztecs were wise to the scam, and fake beans didn't get very far. It's incredible to think that something we now drink in hot cocoa or eat as chocolate. Cake was once the backbone of an entire economy. Let's not forget the fur trade of North America. For centuries, pelts, especially beaver pelts, functioned as a form of currency among Native Americans and European colonists. The Hudson's Bay Company, one of the oldest trading companies in the world, even created a system where one-made beaver pelt was a standard unit of trade. Pelts could buy everything from weapons to cloth to food supplies. They were durable, valuable, and highly demanded, especially in Europe where beaver hats were a fashion craze. If you think fashion today is expensive, imagine paying for an entire shipment of goods with stacks of animal skins. That was not just fashion, it was money. Meanwhile, in parts of Asia, tea bricks became a kind of currency. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was pressed into solid bricks that could be stacked, stored, and traded. In Tibet, Mongolia, and Siberia, people used tea bricks to buy goods or even pay taxes. The bricks could also be broken apart, boiled, and drunk, giving this money an edible advantage. It is a strange but practical idea, currency that could keep you alive if you were starving. The more tightly compressed and pure the tea, the higher its value. To this day, antique tea bricks are collected as relics of one of the strangest and most fragrant monetary systems in history. Some forms of currency were shockingly alive. In parts of Africa, cattle were not only wealth, they were money itself. The number of cows a person owned determined their status, power, and ability to trade. Cattle could buy land, wives, and political influence. They were the bank accounts of their time, with 4 legs and a heartbeat. The same was true in other regions of the world, from Mongolia to India, where livestock held monetary value. Of course, using living animals as money came with complications, disease, theft, and the occasional runaway banknote. But for centuries it worked, and people measured wealth not in gold coins, but in the size of their herds. If all of this sounds strange, it's only the beginning. Human beings have used shells, feathers, stones, and even cigarettes as money. Each of these strange currencies tells us something deeper about the societies that created them. They reveal what people valued most, what resources were scarce, and how creativity shaped survival. Money, after all, is just trust in physical form. If enough people believe in it, even the weirdest thing can become valuable. As we move deeper into history, the creativity with which people defined money becomes even more fascinating. In some places, the very idea of money was tied not to food or stone, but to beauty, status, and symbols of spirituality. One of the most widespread and remarkable examples comes from the Pacific Islands, where cowrie shells became the currency of choice. These small, glossy shells, easily recognizable for their porcelain-like shine, were used across Asia, Africa, and Oceania for centuries. They were light, durable, and hard to counterfeit. Entire kingdoms ran on shell money. In some parts of Africa, the value of a bride was measured in thousands of cowrie shells. They were so trusted that even as coinage spread across the world, cowries remained powerful symbols of wealth. In fact, the cowrie shell became one of the longest-lasting forms of currency in human history, circulating for over 1,000 years. But shells weren't the only beautiful object turned into currency. Feathers, especially rare bird feathers, carried immense value in certain cultures. The Ambori of New Zealand, for example, treasured the feathers of the huya bird, which were considered sacred and associated with nobility. While not a standardized currency in the same way as shells or stones, feathers were used in exchanges of power, gifts, and symbols of rank. They held the same weight in society as coins or bills do for us today. Imagine trying to save up for something important, not with a paycheck, but by collecting rare feathers from a nearly extinct bird. That was wealth, prestige, and power all in one. The strangeness of money only becomes more extreme when we look at prisons. In confined spaces where official money has no value, people create their own forms of exchange. One of the most famous examples is the use of cigarettes as money during the 20th century, especially in World War II prisoner of war camps. A single cigarette could be traded for food, favors, or clothing. Even people who didn't smoke still valued cigarettes, because they were universally desired and scarce. Later, when smoking bans started affecting prisons, inmates switched to things like instant noodles, which became a kind of underground currency. A pack of ramen could carry more weight in prison than a dollar bill ever could. It's proof that money doesn't need to come from a government, it just needs to be something people agree has value. Now let's jump to ancient China, where things get even stranger. At one point, knives and spades were used as money. Yes, actual metal tools, forged into shapes resembling farming equipment, served as currency. Known as knife money and spade money, these items circulated widely before round coins became the norm. Holding one of these objects in your hand, you'd feel its weight and usefulness. It was both symbolic and practical, a reminder that value once came directly from the labor and survival tools people depended on. Over time, of course, China pioneered some of the first true coins and even paper currency, but the legacy of knife and spade money remains a fascinating chapter in the story of economics. Speaking of metal, let's not forget the strange forms gold itself has taken. In West Africa, for example, intricate gold dust was carefully measured out in tiny amounts to conduct trade. Traders carried scales and small boxes of gold dust, measuring transactions by the pinch. In other cases, gold was molded into odd shapes like miniature replicas of weapons, animals, or tools which were used in ritual trade. These weren't coins, they were artworks that doubled as money. To the people who used them, the beauty of the object enhanced its value, blurring the line between art and currency. Meanwhile, across the oceans in colonial Virginia, another surprising form of money emerged. Tobacco. The crop was so central to life and trade that it became a standard of exchange. Farmers would bundle dried tobacco leaves and use them to pay taxes, wages, or debts. For decades, tobacco was the real backbone of the economy, circulating side by side with coins. Like salt or codfish, its value came from necessity, was both consumable and tradable, and its addictive qualities only heightened demand. The irony of a currency you could literally smoke away is not lost on historians today. Sometimes, the strangest money wasn't just odd, it was huge. Take the manila, a type of metal bracelet that became a form of currency in West Africa. These horseshoe-shaped objects, often made of copper or bronze, were exchanged in large quantities for goods. Sadly, they also became tied to the dark history of the transatlantic slave trade, as European traders used manillas to purchase human lives. The haunting truth is that currency, no matter how strange, often reflects the moral values or moral failures of its time. But not all strange money came with such dark shadows. Consider the case of wampum among Native American tribes in the northeastern United States. Wampum was made from beads crafted out of shells, polished and strung together into belts or jewelry. Each bead carried value, but together they could form powerful symbols of agreements, treaties, or trade. Wampum wasn't just money, it was storytelling. A belt of wampum might seal a political alliance or record a history, making it one of the few currencies that also functioned as a living record of culture. It reminds us that money is never just about economics, it's also about meaning. Even stranger examples can be found if we keep digging. In parts of Siberia, for example, fur wasn't just currency, it was taxed as such by the Russian Empire. Known as the yasik, this tribute of fur was demanded from native Siberians who delivered valuable sable pelts as a form of payment to the Tsar. The empire literally ran on fur, building wealth and expansion on the backs of tiny animals whose coats warmed aristocrats thousands of miles away. What began as local trade became imperial policy, turning fur into one of the most powerful currencies of its time. The creativity doesn't stop there. In certain Pacific cultures, teeth ears, actual teeth, were used as money. Whale teeth, in particular, carried enormous symbolic value. In Fiji, for instance, a whale's tooth, known as a tabua, was considered sacred and could be used to buy everything from forgiveness to land. Even today, in ceremonial contexts, the whale's tooth holds cultural significance. To imagine teeth as wealth may feel unsettling, but it shows once again how flexible human imagination is when defining value. And in yet another fascinating twist, consider stone money in different forms. We've already mentioned yaps, rice stones, but across the world in parts of Africa, granite and iron rods were used as trade tools that doubled as wealth. Some were so heavy and awkward that they could only function as symbols rather than practical means of purchase. Yet people trusted them, revered them, and used them to keep economies running. All of these examples, from shells and feathers to teeth and tobacco, prove something profound. Money is not really about the object itself. It's about agreement. It's about shared belief. People have turned some of the strangest, most unexpected items into currency, and as long as their societies trusted that value, the system worked. By now it's clear that human creativity in defining money knows no bounds. But as we step into more recent history, the list of strange currencies only gets more bizarre. For instance, during World War I and World War II, when economies collapsed and inflation skyrocketed, people often turned to anything that held real, immediate value. In Germany, during the Weimar Republic, paper currency lost its worth so quickly that entire wheelbarrows full of banknotes were needed to buy a loaf of bread. In those desperate times, people sometimes abandoned the useless paper and reverted to trading goods directly. Butter, eggs, and coal became more valuable than official marks. And in many cases, cigarettes once again became the de facto currency of survival. One of the strangest modern examples of money appeared in post-Soviet Russia, where vodka was sometimes used as a form of payment. Wages could be partially distributed in bottles of vodka, which workers then consumed, traded, or even saved like cash. While it sounds like a dark joke, it was a real reflection of scarcity and the fact that in times of crisis, what people want most becomes their new currency. This wasn't unique to Russia. Other regions in economic collapse have seen alcohol, coffee, and even chocolate bars become forms of emergency money. Looking back further, let's not forget spices. For centuries, spices like black pepper were worth their weight in gold. During the Middle Ages, pepper was not just a seasoning but a treasure. Bags of peppercorns were stored like jewels, guarded as family wealth. In some records, pepper was used to pay dowries, taxes, and even rent. Imagine handing your landlord a pouch of pepper instead of a check. That was daily life in parts of medieval Europe. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg carried similar prestige, becoming currencies of international trade that shaped exploration, wars, and the creation of global empires. In some societies, animals themselves became currency. In parts of Africa and Asia, cattle served as wealth for centuries. A man's fortune was measured not by coins in a chest, but by the size of his herd. Cows were exchanged for land, dowries, and political alliances. Even today, in some rural regions, cattle remain a form of practical wealth, blurring the line between currency and living asset. It's a reminder that money doesn't always have to be an object. It can be a living, breathing creature that sustains life. Equally fascinating is the history of salt as money. The word salary itself comes from salarium, which referred to the payments Roman soldiers received, sometimes in the form of salt. Salt was essential for preserving food, and its scarcity made it one of the most valuable substances in ancient times. Great trade routes, wars, and even entire cities were built around the salt trade. Calling someone worth their salt comes directly from this history, proving just how deeply this strange form of money is rooted in our language. Jumping across the globe, we find one of the most unexpected currencies in the Aztec Empire, cacao beans. The very seeds of chocolate once functioned as money. The Aztecs considered cacao so precious that it was used to buy food, clothing, and services. Historical accounts suggest that a rabbit might cost 30 cacao beans, while a turkey hen could cost 200. For something we now turn into sweet treats, cacao beans once represented serious wealth. The irony, of course, is that cacao was fragile. It could be eaten, it could spoil, and it was always at risk of pests. But that didn't stop it from functioning as money, proving once again that shared belief gives objects their power. In modern times, we've seen the rise of some equally strange forms of currency. Consider prison ramen, already mentioned, or even amusement park tokens that became unofficial trade currency in some communities. In hyperinflation-stricken Zimbabwe, the official paper notes became so useless that people used foreign currency, food, or barter instead. And in the 21st century, we've entered an era where entirely digital money cryptocurrency exists. While Bitcoin may not seem strange now, when it was first introduced in 2009, the idea of invisible computer-generated coins seemed absurd. And yet, within a decade, people were buying cars, houses, and entire businesses with it. It's a reminder that every form of money, no matter how strange, begins with skepticism before becoming accepted. But perhaps the strangest story of money isn't about what was used, but how it was stored. In some African societies, iron money took the shape of giant tools or ornaments that were too large to carry. These were left in special locations, like shrines or meeting places, and ownership was tracked communally. Similarly, in Yap, those enormous stone discs called rhinestones were sometimes so heavy they never moved at all. If one was transferred from one owner to another, everyone simply agreed the stone now belonged to the new person, even though the stone stayed in place. In fact, one famous rhinestone was lost at sea during transport, but because everyone knew it existed, it was still counted as part of a man's wealth. Think about that, a form of money that was accepted, even when it was physically unreachable. That's the ultimate proof of money being more about belief than the object itself. So, what do all these stories teach us? First, that money is one of the most flexible inventions in human history. It has been shells, stones, feathers, furs, cattle, cacao, salt, and cigarettes. It has been measured in peppercorns, polished beads, gold dust, and even whale teeth. No matter the culture, no matter the era, people have found ways to assign value to the things around them, turning ordinary or symbolic objects into powerful tools of exchange. Second, it shows us that money is deeply cultural. What one society treasures, another might dismiss. To the Aztecs, cacao beans were treasure. To Europeans, pepper was gold. To the people of Yap, giant immovable stones were wealth. These examples remind us that money is not a universal truth but a cultural agreement, one shaped by needs, beliefs, and environments. Finally, these stories remind us of something surprisingly modern. The future of money may be just as strange as its past. If societies once trusted shells, feathers, and stones, then why not trust lines of code, digital wallets, or even virtual currencies inside games? Already, people spend billions of dollars buying virtual good skins, tokens, and NFTs that exist only on screens. To outsiders, that may seem as strange as trading whale teeth or peppercorns. But history tells us that strange money often becomes normal, and normal money eventually becomes strange. So next time you open your wallet or check your bank account, remember that money is not as straightforward as it seems. The coins and bills you carry or even the digits on your screen are only the latest chapter in a long, bizarre and creative story of human trade. Who knows what the future will bring? Maybe one day, the strangest things we use as money today will look just as ordinary as cowrie shells or cacao beans once did. And that's the beauty of it. Money is not about the object, but about the people who believe in it. Across history, humanity has proven again and again that value is in the eye of the beholder, and sometimes the strangest things make the most powerful currencies of all.